Continuing with our tour through neurohormones and neurotransmitters, we're going to continue with Nikki's presentation on oxytocin. So oxytocin is kind of a favorite of a lot of people because it's frequently referred to as the cuddle hormone. It is a hormone that is released by and produced by the hypothalamus and released into the bloodstream via its own blood system through the pituitary gland, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, why it's called the cuddle hormone is because it's associated with childbirth and is known to be released during hugging. Oxytocin is going to go into the bloodstream, and it's going to activate oxytocin receptors, which are metabotropic receptors. And it contributes to what's called pro-social behaviors. So it has to do with trust and bonding, and that makes sense in the context of childbirth, and also can make sense in the context of friendships and all of that. It is thought that oxytocin might have some clinical use in treating symptoms of depression and in individuals who have autism spectrum disorders, which very often have issues with those prosocial types of behaviors. Now here's a picture so you can kind of see what the differences are. So in some of these hormones and neurohormones. So here's the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus has these neurosecretory cells in it right in here, which are producing these neurohormones, and they're coming down through this little channel here, or through rather these neurons, but being released here directly into the bloodstream. So notice that there's a little blood vessel right in here, and that's found only in the posterior pituitary. So in the posterior pituitary, the hypothalamus is releasing those hormones, those neurohormones, and then it goes into the bloodstream and it goes to those different areas of the body. Now there's only two neurohormones that do this, and those are oxytocin and ADH, which is the hormone that Jade talked about in vasopressin, in her vasopressin presentation. I'll get to that. Now, on the flip side of that is the anterior pituitary. And in the anterior pituitary, hormones are produced, again, by instruction from the hypothalamus. But some of those hormones are released by instruction of the hypothalamus, so that they're produced actually in here. So there's endocrine cells that are in here that are producing these various hormones that you see down below, but they are only released in response to signals from the hypothalamus. So they're normally inhibited unless the hypothalamus disinhibits them. And we'll see a little bit of this probably coming up. But you can see some of the ones that you may have heard of, growth hormone. Here's our endorphins. So we talked about that already. And a few others that would go to activate the adrenal cortex, and thyroid glands, etc. So let's get back to oxytocin. So when oxytocin is released and goes through the bloodstream, it's going to find receptors, these OXT receptors. That's what the OXTR means, and they're metabotropic. So this is kind of their structure. So the oxytocin will find its receptor site and it binds. And then in doing that, because it's metabotropic, it's going to cause a series of things to happen internally. And here's some of them. And obviously you don't need to know these, but what you see, a couple of things you might recognize is that we have some increased calcium levels, and we activate some enzymes that are in here, and some are going to go to the nucleus and going to cause some changes to occur. And I referred a little bit to this when we've just started our topic on learning and memory, so I will refer to this again. Vasopressin, which is Jade's presentation. It has all sorts of names. Sometimes it's called arginine vasopressin, sometimes it's called AVP, sometimes it's called antidiuretic hormone, which is ADH, and it's a neuroactive peptide, so it's also a peptide. There's a chain of amino acids. It has 9 of them. And it's going to be produced by neurons in hypothalamus, and it's going to be released again via the posterior pituitary into the bloodstream. Now, Jade presented this, and she talked about the fact that it has 9 amino acids and a sulfur bridge. So I put this in so you could kind of see it. Actually, here's both the chain of amino acids for arginine and also for oxytocin. And cysteine, the CYS, is an amino acid that has sulfur in it, and it's that which can form a bridge across this peptide with another cysteine. So both of these actually have that, and you can see they're very similar in their structure. They're just very small differences. So AVP is also called antidiuretic because what it does is it helps the body to maintain water. It acts on the receptors in the kidney so that when the water levels go too low, it prevents the kidneys from producing urine. It also acts on blood vessels, and I kind of got cut off a little bit on this slide, but it basically will cause the blood vessels, so let me see if I can move this up so you can see this a little better. I'm not sure I can. It creates a contraction of smooth muscle in the blood vessels, which causes an increase in blood pressure. So that's what AVP is doing. So going on here, so again, we are looking primarily here at the posterior hypothalamus. So I have this image in here quite a bit because it's a different form of release into the bloodstream. It's more direct from the hypothalamus, so the hypothalamus is directly causing this release, where in this case there are hypothalamic cells which are involved, but the actual production of these hormones are in the pituitary gland. Now here's a way to look at it. So the hypothalamus is going to detect any changes in water, and it wants to create, where the body's always trying to achieve what we call homeostasis. So it's balance that we need to achieve. And so if the hypothalamus produces the vasopressin or ADH, it's going to be produced, sent to the posterior part of the pituitary gland, sent into the bloodstream, goes into the blood, goes to the kidneys, and is going to cause urine to become more concentrated. In other words, it's going to hold on to some of that water. So on the other function of vasopressin, and here's the smooth muscles, so vasopressin can be released. It's going to cause constriction or contraction or constriction of those muscles, and it's going to cause an increase in blood pressure. So this is some of the things that vasopressin's involved with. If there's too much, then you retain too much water, and that's going to also increase your blood pressure. If there's too little, then that person can lose a lot of water and therefore become dehydrated, and it drops the blood pressure. And as Jade brought up, this is a condition that's found in a particular form of diabetes called diabetes insipidus. Going a little further, we're going to go now into Janelle's presentation of neuropeptide Y. Now, neuropeptide Y is very interesting. Again, this is a neuropeptide. It's found in hypothalamic circuits, and it's involved with appetite. So it helps to regulate appetite. And it's also expressed in some areas of the body, these postganglionic neurons, which are part of the sympathetic nervous system. So it's co-expressed with norepinephrine. In the brain, we're interested in NPY and where it's produced, and it's in the arcuate nucleus of the lateral hypothalamus. So I'll show you a picture of the hypothalamus and all the real estate it has. and all the very important nuclei that are there. Neuropeptide Y is called orexigenic, and it's because it has appetite-stimulating effects. So it's going to be released, and when it is, it's going to make us want to eat, and with a preference toward carbohydrates. So I think mine is being released a lot. NPY is also, interestingly, these neurons are interacting with areas of the reward pathway, which kind of makes sense when you think about sort of our inclination to eat sweets and eat carbohydrate-rich foods. So it's a part of the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala, which are involved with the reward. I wanted to show you this, and clearly this isn't something you need to memorize, but it kind of shows you, so here's the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, and here are the neurons that produce NPY, and they're going to produce NPY in response to low glucose levels, or low blood sugar, low insulin levels, and something we'll talk a little bit about leptin, which is also a marker in the blood that tells us whether or not we have enough food or not. And when it is activated, it goes over to the lateral hypothalamus. So arcuate nucleus is in the hypothalamus, and so is this, the lateral hypothalamus. And when it does that, NPY, notice this plus sign, is going to stimulate or activate these orexigenic neurons that are then going to produce something to increase food intake. There's another set of neurons called POMC, and these are also in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, and they have more or less the opposite effect. So when glucose levels are high, so you can kind of say glucose levels are high, these and they detect levels of insulin and leptin in the bloodstream. And what they do is, when they become activated, what they do is inhibit this set of neurons, so that theoretically would make us not need to eat. So that there's this kind of interesting circuit in the brain that's constantly regulating our need to eat or not eat based on glucose levels and based on other blood markers of whether or not we have enough energy, so leptin and insulin. So the pluses and minuses are kind of telling you what are the pluses telling you what's stimulating, right? What's activating or exciting a group of neurons, and then what their response is here, and that you can see that there's some feedback between these two sets of neurons in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. So just an interesting circuit. We're going to look more at neural circuits coming up. So again, this is sort of a recap that might be helpful. So when glucose concentrations fall, the arcuate nucleus, which contains both these NPY neurons and also the POMC neurons, which I think I didn't take something out here, but these neurons are going to be inhibited by insulin and leptin, and therefore they're going to when they get activated, they'll stimulate food intake, and it's related to glucose levels. And so you don't need to know all those details. I just thought it would be interesting for you to see that there are two neuronal nuclei in the same general area of the hypothalamus, which are both sort of the light switch off and on, but they both project to an area in the lateral hypothalamus that's going to do something, either stimulate food intake, or they're going to inhibit that area so that we don't stimulate food intake. And that, I think, is where we'll stop.